Several viewers have asked us, how much immunity do the COVID-19 vaccines give people who take immunosuppressant drugs?
We have 10 million Americans right now who are immunosuppressed.
Our sources are Dr. Aditi Narukar, a physician from the Harvard Medical School, Dr. Gregory Schrank, an infectious diseases expert from the University of Maryland's Medical School, and a new study from Johns Hopkins University.
We are seeing that there is new data emerging from Johns Hopkins and from NYU to show that perhaps people who are immunocompromised on immunosuppressant medications may not have that antibody response after the second dose with Pfizer and Moderna.
The Johns Hopkins University study looked at 658 organ transplant recipients who received a COVID-19 vaccine. It found 46% of them did not develop any antibody response. We asked our experts why.
The vaccines themselves, actually, their intent is to stimulate the immune system as a form of training to prepare it for possible infection, like with COVID-19, and create antibodies as a major part of that preparation.
But our experts went on to say when the immune system is suppressed, either naturally or by drugs, it will
limit the ability of our immune system to create those antibodies, specifically impacting our memory B cells that create antibodies, and then can limit how effective the vaccines are.
And our experts say that this is actually not uncommon, rather, with vaccines and people who have immune suppressed or on immunosuppressant drugs. That we see this quite frequently when it comes to vaccines, because that's the point of an immunosuppressant, is to suppress the immune system. But there is some good news. Researchers are now looking at whether or not a third shot in the case of the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, or a booster shot in the case of the Johnson & Johnson vaccines, if adding that extra shot will raise that level of immunity in that 46% that did not develop antibodies. So we're waiting to see what the results of those studies will be as we continue to work our way through this pandemic. With your Verify, I'm Matt Gregory. Back to you, Tony.